Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing great. Welcome to episode 205 of the Mind Over Finger podcast. This is one of my favorite interviews on the show, one of my favorite guests. I speak with trombone player Sasha Romero. If you don't know her, let me give you a little bit of background. Sasha was appointed principal trombone of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra in 2018 after spending 2 seasons with the Fourth Worth Symphony. She is from Longview, Texas, and she grew up within the acclaimed and robust Texas band system and achieved great musical success at a young age. She got a Bachelor of Music degree at Baylor University, where she studied with Brent Phillips, and her Master of Music degree at Rice University with Alan Barnhill. In addition to a lengthy list of national and international solo and chamber music competition wins to her name, Sasha is honored to have been a semi-finalist in the first brass division of the 2019-16 International Tchaikovsky Competition in St. Petersburg, Russia. Sasha is a passionate educator and currently serves on the trombone faculties at Rutgers University, Mannes School of Music, and Bard College Conservatory of Music. A highly sought after teacher, soloist, and clinician, she has presented solo recitals and master classes at numerous colleges, universities, music conservatories, and industry conventions across the United States. This was such a fun conversation, and I hope she can come back on the show because there was just not enough time. I had so many more questions for her, but we covered a lot of great topics that I know you're going to enjoy. We talked about her journey from being a young student to being a successful professional. We talked about the challenges she faced, like managing ADHD and honing her audition skills. She shared valuable tips on efficient practice, developing musicality, and balancing work and life. And she also talks about her advocacy for the transgender community and the importance of being allies through actions in education. I think you're going to love this conversation with Sasha Romero. Let's go to the show. Sasha Romero, I've been having such a great time following you on social media. You are fantastic player. You have great practice tip. You're creative. You're funny, but also seeing you live an authentic life is so inspiring to me. And my purpose with Mind Over Finger is to help people creating a mindful, intentional, fulfilling life based on an understanding of their authentic self. And I think you embody that. And I'm just so excited that you're here today.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here as well. And yeah, it's quite an introduction, so I hope I live up to it.
I have no doubt. So, Sasha, I like to ask my guests to tell us about themselves. So, please share your journey with us and how that path unfolded for you.
So I'm a native Texan. I grew up in Texas in the 90s and 2000s, and I started music at a very early age. In fact, I really started music before I can even form memories. One of my first musical memories, or really memories at all, was sitting in my mother's lap in church, and I had a hymnal in my hands, and I realized that I could read the intervals somewhat. I didn't really know how the system worked. I didn't know what the notes were called, but I knew that, if the note goes up by a certain amount, I could sort of guess it if I knew the melody well enough. And My entire family is musical, with the exception of my dad. But he's good with sports, and the hand-eye coordination probably helped a little bit. So yeah, my I have five other siblings. We all played brass instruments. I'm the only one who was dumb enough to try to make a career out of it. But here we are. So I guess it worked out. I picked up piano when I was 5, and then I quit when I was 6 and picked it back up in college. Um, I quit because I thought it was kind of boring and no one really challenged me, and I was stuck doing like very simple melodies for a long time. Then I get to trombone, and I have the exact opposite problem where
Mm.
my second year of playing, I get a band director who hands me Bluebells of Scotland, which is one of the hardest trombone solos in the world, and is like, "Hey, can you hit this note? Why don't you try practicing this? Here's some multiple tonguing exercises. Have at it." There's a funny story about how I actually learned triple tonguing, which is that he had just finished a lesson with another trombonist from the high school, and he was joking about how he told me basically, all right, here's how you work this metronome, which was a giant box at the time. I told one of my students about that, and they could not believe me because they'd never seen that before. Anyway, but so he's like, all right, put this on 180 beats a minute, and can you say ta ta ka? And I was like, sure, yeah. And he's like, all right, so now do that twice. All right, now you have to do that at 180 beats a minute by tomorrow, or you're kicked out of band. And I was very gullible back then, and I 1000% believed him. So I went home and I practiced about 6 hours, and then I came back the next day and I was like, I can do it at 220.
Oh my goodness.
So it was exactly the right kind of teaching for me because he knew he could challenge me and that I would respond to it. And so I got a pretty good early start to more advanced techniques than I think most people do. What was lacking as I went through high school and then got into college finally was the fundamentals because I hated playing slow. I hated anything to do with deliberate practice, and so it's kind of funny and karmic to end up on a podcast about mindfulness and practicing strategies and stuff. I did pick that up along the way, but when I first got to college, was not the I was one of the most naive students I have ever met, both as a teacher and as a student. I didn't know what an excerpt was. I was just very disconnected from the musical world. And there's a funny story about how I ended up getting my lucky shirt related to that. And I'll tell it very briefly. But so I didn't know how to actually apply for music school, and I think I sent my application and then the recording to different places. And so I had paid my deposit, but they didn't receive the audition, so they didn't put me into up as a music major. And so I'm going back and forth when I get to school from the offices and the teachers and saying, why can't I sign up for classes? And they're like, who are you? And so long story short, I ended up being granted a last minute audition the day before classes because my teacher had looked up my all state records and saw that I got fourth chair overall that year. And the thing is, they couldn't put me into the system until the next like business day, Monday. And so I actually didn't know where any of my classes were going to be. I
Oh
didn't
my
know I
goodness.
should even ask. And so I missed syllabus day and all of my first day of classes. And so I didn't get the dress code or when concerts were. So for my first concert with Wind Ensemble, I came dressed up in a yellow pinstripe shirt and khaki pants and black shoes. I got the shoes right. And everyone else was in suits and black dresses and things. And I just, in Longview, that was normal to just dress in Sunday best. No one had like, those kinds of like standard orchestral clothing or whatever. And one of my friends 15 minutes before saw me just sitting there warming up and was like, you're not going on stage like that, are you? And I was like, it's just a school concert, it's whatever. Like, I'll stick out a bit. Who cares, right? And he says, he hands me his trombone and he says, hold this and stay here. And so apparently he gets his car and drives to his apartment and comes back with his spare tux. And then he hands it to me, grabs his trombone, walks on stage and says, change right now.
Oh my
And
goodness. That's
the
a
thing
good
is,
friend right there.
yes. The thing was, it was missing buttons from about chest to navel, and I didn't have an undershirt. So the whole time I was T-Rexing trying to hold the shirt together on risers. So that yellow pinstripe shirt has become my lucky shirt because of how hilarious the situation was and how far I've come since that moment. And I've won every competition and audition in that shirt.
Oh,
So
that's amazing.
yeah. And it still fits, which is great. So
I'm
but
gonna need
yeah,
one of those.
yeah. So just um, basically, I went to Baylor for undergrad and then Rice University for the Shepherd School of Music for my grad studies, and did a bunch of solo competitions. Ended up being very successful at those. I also did about 23 professional orchestral auditions before I ended up winning the Fort Worth Symphony job in 2016. Which was in my last year of grad school, which was very lucky for me because I was about to have to take on a lot more students in the Houston area to pay my bills, and was not looking forward to that. I love teaching, but I didn't want to teach 80 students having to commute in Houston traffic. But when I was in the Fort Worth Symphony, it was a really good sort of testing ground for everything I had learned, and I stopped doing recitals and anything outside of playing that job because I was very worried about getting tenure. Because I at that time I like through college, I sort of I was undiagnosed ADHD,
Mm.
and had a lot of issues with things like showing up on time, with practice schedules and preparation, with other things that come with ADHD. Actually, performing was not the problem, but everything auxiliary to doing the job, like showing up with the right stuff at the right time, was very difficult. And by the time I got to Fort Worth Symphony, I uh, knew that I was ADHD. I had been sort of soft re-diagnosed because I had actually been diagnosed as a kid, then told I didn't have it as an adult because back then they thought that people just grew out of it, which is largely not true.
Mhm.
And so I um, I ended up actually almost not getting tenure because there was one concert where I showed up for the beginning of the concert, but not the last piece, which I was on, because my colleagues had joked that, they were like, "All right, see you tomorrow," after the piece, and the director had said some things at the dress rehearsal that morning. It was a festival style thing, and basically implied that like we needed to show up at the beginning of the concert, even though we normally would not. And I ended up just not checking the schedule to make sure that we were actually off, and yeah, I wasn't there. So I was all the way at home. And I actually started retraining after that moment because I thought for sure I was not going to get tenure. So I got some piano tuning tools and I was going to learn to be a piano technician. And I ended up getting tenure, thankfully. And Miguel Harth Bedoya, the director, in my tenure meeting was like, your playing is very good. I love having you here, but just make sure you show up to all of the concerts and the pieces from now on. And he's actually in the at the Met right now because I Danamar is coming up and he's conducting that, and of course he brought that moment up immediately when he saw me. um, but I like to tell people that, especially my students, because I think there's a misnomer that professionals have always been these sort of stellar students and these stellar players and have had everything going right for them and have never had a naive moment, a mistake, a setback in their career. And at least in my case, that's very not true. And I suspect that's the case for many, many, many people. And so for the Met audition, I I took the before that I took the LA Philharmonic second trombone audition and didn't even make it through prelims. So I did not expect to win the Met audition. First of all, um, I didn't even know it was happening until this same friend who gave me the tux contacted me and was like, "Hey, are you taking the Met principal audition?" And I was like, "Oh, they're having an audition," and the deadline to submit was 3 days before he told me that. And so I very apologetically submitted my resume, and they did let me in. I was the 253rd resume. I know that because I was the
Wow.
very last one they accepted.
Oh my
so
goodness.
so I my goal for the preparation process was to just make it through prelims, or at the very least show them that, like, basically play a memorable performance, because even if I wasn't what they were looking for, I wanted them to notice me, to stand out from other people, and to play well enough to at least get through prelims. And so it was really more about proving to myself that I could do the preparation process correctly. So in my head, I said at the beginning of this process, I had about 9 weeks, that I was going to do it right. And for
Mm.
me, what that meant was to basically start with listening and making all of my musical decisions from the get go, which is something that I had sort of done to some extent, but not to the extent I needed to for the Met audition, because it was largely opera excerpts that I had never played. I had never heard many of these pieces. And so that took me about maybe a week and a half, of, like, 3, 4, 5 hour sessions of just listening and just trying to find these excerpts, because
Yeah.
opera is long and often it's hard to hear these things because they don't mix the brass up very high in the recordings compared to the singers. And yeah, so I would spend sometimes 3 hours trying to find a single excerpt. And once I found it, it was pretty easy to come up with what I wanted to do with it, because the thing about opera playing, at least at the Met, is that it's, I think, a lot more lyrical and a lot more vocal in style in a lot of cases, even as a background player. And also, a lot of the excerpts are when you have solos or when you are playing with the chorus. And so my background of playing solos, focusing on solo competitions, actually really helped me there, because I had learned how to craft a phrase and to play in different styles very well. And so I had a very easy time actually learning the excerpts once I knew how they went. And I think that helped me tremendously, first of all, just because um, getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but for the rest of my prep process, I mostly focused on timing and tuning, and basically just what I found out from this process with both of those things was that being absolutely certain of what the problem was and absolutely sure that I had fixed it
Mm,
um, was incredibly helpful for consistency and for maintaining the progress I had made over weeks and weeks and weeks without actually coming back to a certain excerpt. And so what I mean by that was, and I've talked about this a lot, but I made practice tracks with click track. I played, I recorded the excerpts and auto tuned them so that it was in perfect equal temperament. And I had a four or like a 2 or 4 bar lead in click track. So I would be able to just play along with it, of course, in practice, with just a great tool for being able to easily hear tuning errors and timing errors. I could turn the metronome off and say for something like William Tell, where a large issue is coming off of the 2 bar whole notes and then playing the lick on time. That's a big thing that people get kicked out for, is not being able to keep time during rests and long notes. And I would play, say for that excerpt, I would play along without the click track and just the auto tuned track for hours, and then I would record with nothing but the lead in and see how well I could actually do that with nothing. And that was my sort of audition test. So I was basically giving myself mock auditions every day, which I
mm,
think helped. And I could see exactly where I was getting off and rushing or dragging, and I could hear each individual note and isolate them with a digital audio workstation and slow it down and test exactly how far I was above or below the center of the pitch. And so it was very easy actually to polish these excerpts and to get them in the best audition shape I've ever been. And so I was very confident in my work going in because, there were 2 weeks during the Fort Worth or during the season in Fort Worth where I was playing such taxing rep that I just could not practice afterwards. It would have been dangerous for me for my chops. And so I just took 2 weeks off in the middle of this 9 week prep period, and I came back and I had not lost a single bit of my practice, which was very surprising to me.
mhm.
So I get to the audition and um, I don't play perfectly, but I'm pretty confident in my work. And I found that because I was so confident in the timing and tuning and just having the basics down, and the consistency that came with that, I could focus a lot more on the musicality, on managing my nerves, because I'm the kind of person who, at least initially, got so nervous that I would black out and my legs would shake and I could barely breathe. So I'm not at all one of those naturally confident players, although I have learned to be that way. And the semis round was the first time I had actually played a note perfect round in my life. The finals was not note perfect, but the solo was apparently what won me the audition, according to the committee. And yeah, so I guess that's a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but yeah, I think the thing that was really sort of surprising to me and is that all of the solo preparation that I did and all the competitions ended up being, I think, the biggest advantage I had in that particular audition. Because I think a lot of students in particular get this idea that to win an audition, you need to just be good at excerpts and nothing else. And I really think you have to be a good musician first. And, I think that uh, I don't think it's really possible to be good at the excerpts, even if you're hitting all of the notes, if you don't really understand the music. And I'm not sure that
Yeah.
just playing excerpts is the best way to learn how to be a good musician.
Yes. Oh, I love this so much. I don't even want to talk. I just want to let you continue. You've touched on so many points that I was very curious about. But I want to go back to what you said at the beginning about your band
Sure.
teacher when you said he was the right kind of teacher for you. And I think that's so wonderful when someone gets to have that experience, to have a teacher who's the right teacher for them and ignites a spark in them in the way that really yields something long term. And I'm sure you aim to be the same with your own students. And I love what you said about creating a memorable performance. I'm going to put that on a sticker and have it nearby because, yes, it's so right. It's exactly what one should aim to, what should aim for when they prepare for a performance or an audition, especially, I mean, not especially, auditions as well. And I love what you describe about the process. Correct me if there's an Instagram story about that or an Instagram post about this. I think you made one, right?
Yes, there is. Yeah, I sort of did a very brief explanation of how to create these practice tracks because people have asked me about that a lot. And I intend to make a more full explanation of how I use them because there's actually quite a few tools that I have to use it in a digital audio workstation to get the full effects out of it because just having the tracks alone with like if I were to if I were to put MP3s out there, it wouldn't quite be the same thing. But yeah, I'm very busy, so I will get to it eventually, I promise.
One thing that I've read about you is that intent you have to have musicality in what you do, and you post these fantastic, I mean, your Instagram rather, your Instagram account is so wonderful with these practice tips. um, and you also have the YouTube channel with these beautiful videos of extremely musical uh, you know uh, renditions of arrangements that you've made, just beautiful. I hope all of the listeners go and watch these videos. And you talked about the audition preparation where you attended to all of these fundamentals. And I think that a lot of listeners sometimes have an issue of how to transition between technical and musicality. What does that look like for you to practice musicality?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think that there is a misnomer about the difference between musicality and technicality. I think a lot of people are taught that it's two sides of the same coin, which is close, but I think it's actually just the same thing. And what I mean by that is that conceptually, I think a lot of people are taught to think of, say, a B flat three or whatever, is the same note, whether or not you're playing it forte or piano or accented or sustained or short or any number of different colors, right? And a real shift in my thinking was to realize that it might be the same note from a music theory perspective, but it's not the same note at all from a physical perspective. The way
Mm,
that you produce that pitch in all of those different colors is entirely different. And so I realized that if I didn't decide how I was going to play a phrase musically and have a very clear image, aural image in my head of how it was going to go, then I was actually never going to be truly consistent because I was basically improvising the technique because the musicality is just a collection of colors, which translated into how you physically produce them, a different phrase is an entirely different physical exercise, right? And so the same set of notes with the same markings between two different players of two different phrases are two entirely different physical processes. And so, of course, I wasn't consistent because I was just not actually doing the same thing over and over again, which is what you need for consistency.
mm,
So, what I learned to do starting first in the process was to one, just listen to as many recordings of the piece as I could get my hand on, and listen to pieces in similar styles if I wasn't familiar with the style, and just develop opinions on what I liked and what I didn't like, and learn the piece just through listening well enough to basically sing along with it and to know it almost memorized, right? Um, and the goal of that was to not only find out what I did like in other people's playing, but what I didn't like, which sometimes was actually more useful because um, it's not always immediately clear why we like or dislike something in a person's playing. But through listening to recordings that I either hated or loved many, many, many times, I sort of organically learned what they were doing to shape their phrases and the notes and how they thought of their own technique on a sort of, yeah, a organic level, right? This is very I wouldn't be able to put it into words, I guess,
mhm.
but I had a very clear idea of what I needed to do to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve in a piece and to not achieve the things I didn't want to do. Um or I think that makes sense.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
and so it also altered the way I practiced quite a bit because besides just that sort of preparation period, um, it changed how I practiced from primarily focusing on the difficult licks to the difficult phrases. But it also gave me motivation to practice the the things that were more difficult long enough to actually achieve the musicality that I wanted out of them. Um, and A good example is my first solo competition with the International Trombone Festival, the Weehee competition, which is an Arthur Pryor piece, which is who wrote the Bluebells of Scotland solo that I actually started with. So I was very familiar with the style, but I had never really tackled it and like really conquered the challenges in those kinds of pieces. And I remember there were two notes in the second section, just F G. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-da, ba-da-ga-da-ga-da. And then it gets very technical, but I practiced those two notes for hours before I was satisfied with how they sounded because I finally had meaning behind the phrases, and
Mm.
the technical stuff actually became sort of fluff in a lot of ways, and it didn't carry the majority of the emotion. Those two notes did. And so it became vital that I actually played it exactly right with exactly the right amount of crescendo, the right articulation, the right pacing of the crescendo, diminuendo, everything, right? The tone, the vibrato had to be perfect. And I had exactly what I wanted in my head. And as it turns out, when you have that clear of an image in your head of what you want, it turns out that like I think I just found out that I was very lackadaisical about how I played things before that. And once I stopped being that way and started being more specific with how I played things, it was more consistent. To the point where as I got closer to the audition to the competition, I would do a run through and I would almost have an out of body experience because it was so automatic for me that I would think while I'm playing these crazy technical licks, how am I doing this? Like I'm not actually controlling this. This is just automatic. And it was an experience that I had never truly had before. And I had heard about people going into that sort of flow state.
Hmm.
But I didn't really know how to get there myself. And as it turns out, besides just the hours and hours and hours of work, it was taking this approach to um, tackling a piece of music.
Yeah. I love that. It's very mind over finger.
That's great. Perfect.
And then I like to say that you start with the mind over finger so that it's so efficient and effective and the direction is so clear and the motivation is so clear. And then you work on it until it becomes finger over mind where you just can let go, right? I
Yeah.
love that. But I absolutely love what you describe in terms of how a note, depending on the musicality, is going to be completely different than the same note in the theoretical context. So this is perfect. I know you're a really busy performer. You have performed at the Met. You traveled the world, play recitals. You also play in jazz ensembles. You teach a lot. How does that look like for you to maintain stamina when there's just such a busy schedule?
Yeah. So one correction, I have played in jazz ensemble, singular.
Oh, okay, there we go.
Yeah, I've had exactly in terms of professional experience, I have had exactly one concert with a big band, which was amazing. I hope I get more. Hopefully that will be plural because it's very fun. But yeah, as far as maintaining my stamina, I um I've learned that rest is very, very, very important, and not just physical rest, but mental rest. Sleep is very important, of course. I don't get enough of it, but I try to at least, because at least at the level of playing that I'm at, and with the amount of playing I do, I don't really have to maintain my physical fitness on the horn. It just sort of stays there unless I take like 2 weeks off, and then I start to feel like I'm out of shape. Whereas it used to be if I took a day off, I would be horrible at the instrument, you know. So it's just sheer number of hours helps with it quite a bit. But I used to schedule myself with my lessons and all my extra gigs and flying out and the Met stuff to where each day wasn't necessarily all that busy in and of itself, but I never gave myself an entire day off where I could just not do anything if I didn't want to. And I would go months at a time without a single day off sometimes. And even if it was just one lesson, I learned sort of the hard way that I needed a total break from work for at least 24 hours to really fully recover mentally because I would get so burnt out. And also moving to New York, I would get seasonal affective disorder quite badly, whereas in Texas that never happened. Um, and uh, and so I've also learned that I just need to be more deliberate about being outside whenever possible and exercising during the winter months, especially to just maintain, my brain chemistry so that I can function. Because when I first got to New York during the winter, I was mildly depressed and didn't want to do anything really except just sleep and watch TV or play video games. And it's not to say I didn't get stuff done, because I did, but it was much more of a struggle than I think it was when I was in a sunnier state at a lower latitude.
Hmm.
And Yeah, as far as like the scheduling goes, that is sort of an evolving administrative process. What I try to do nowadays is just to prioritize uh, how much time I'm going to dedicate to practicing in a given day, in a given week, and just basically, okay, I have 5 hours, I have 10 hours that I'm going to practice this week because that's just how busy I am or whatever. And then I, look at what I have to work on. And Depending on what it is, say like, for example, in 2019, I did the Tchaikovsky competition while we were also preparing um, the ring cycle at the Met. And that all of those things took up quite a bit of my time. So I was practicing in the breaks between in rehearsals and shows, just going to the practice rooms of the Met and practicing whatever I could in those 15, 20, 30 minutes. And when I got home, I often just collapsed because I didn't have any more energy. And so I guess to summarize, I try to be both efficient and also practical, and also prioritize rest. And it can be very difficult to do all of those things. But I have stopped trying to let perfection. Sorry about the sirens.
That is New
Um,
York life.
yes, I've stopped trying to. I've stopped beating myself up over whether or not I can be perfect with how I use my time and whether or not I'm getting the ideal number of practice hours. And I just try to do the best with what I have, because that's the reality of being a working musician. And sometimes that means I do a just a 5 minute warm up before I practice something, or sometimes I'll skip my warm up entirely, being perfectly honest, and just go straight into something because again, I'm kind of always in shape these days.
Hmm.
Um, and Yeah, I don't know, but it is very difficult to fit everything in, and I will admit that it constantly feels like I'm behind on administrative tasks, on things I need to practice, and on rest. But it's something that I am constantly evolving and trying to work into a better system for myself. Um, so I'll let you know when I finally perfect that and I do everything right.
Yes, please do. I think that everyone is always looking for that answer, right? And I know you're a really busy teacher in addition to being a performer. And I think that your students are really lucky to have access to your expertise. And that's something that they talk about where they spend so much time in the practice room. That's something I hear from young musicians a lot. And they don't feel like they have that much progress, even though they put all of this time inside of the practicing. So I think it's really inspiring to hear how mindful you are in your approach to practicing. And this way, someone can walk in the practice room and have efficient work and walk away feeling like they've made some progress. Do you have some specific advice you could give students in how they can, get more bang for their buck inside of the practice room?
You bet I do. Yes. I have several thoughts on this subject. I could talk for hours on this alone. But So I think, like I said, I did not start out as the most efficient practicer. I always just did high, fast, and loud. So first of all, right off the bat, all of your teachers are correct. Slow practice, practicing your fundamentals, that is one of the most important things you can do, because you need to raise your fundamental base level. That's kind of how I think of it. Because yeah, you can practice a piece from here and raise it up to here, but then if you can get your base level to here, then you're already starting higher than where you would otherwise. So I always try to prioritize fundamentals and get at least the basics done every day. And then in the practice room, I ran into several ruts in my playing, and also I just overbooked myself constantly. Like I said, I did a lot of auditions and competitions, so I was flying out at least every month to go do something during school. So I had to be efficient, and so um, one of the things I did was just to really actually use my tuner and metronome, and to really prioritize you. If I had a tool that I knew would help, to use it. Use my mirror. and actually look at it. Because I think a lot of times what I'll see in my lessons is a student will get a metronome out or they'll get a mirror out and they won't actually be looking at it. They think they are, but they're just not. So being mindful of how much you are actually using the tools at your disposal that you know will help. Recording myself helped quite a bit. And then there's this sort of practice method that I think pretty much everyone gravitates to initially, which is to start at the beginning of a piece, to play along. Oh, I made a mistake. Let's go back and try again. Oh, I made a mistake. And just to hammer that out until they can move on. And it's such an inefficient way to practice. And so what I started doing was big picture, small picture, big picture. When I was learning something, I would just go through every single note, even if it took me 3 hours to actually read through something. And initially my sight reading was horrible, so it would actually take me that long to read through a solo sometimes. And once I had played every note, I had a much better idea of what the challenges would be throughout the whole piece. And then I could bracket them off and practice those specific moments and plan when I was going to practice them. And then do a run through at the end of every practice session of to put into put all my practice into context. Another big shift I made in my practicing was to be much more deliberate about what goals I actually had for a given practice session, and to stop thinking of it as to stop thinking of practice as a function of time and sort of percentage increases in how good I could play. Um, and I changed that into basically thinking of my playing as a whole and the challenges I needed to conquer as a very large but very ch- uh, hmm, as like a set of distinct challenges that I needed to accomplish. But once I solved them, they were solved forever, right? And I thought of it this way: it's like, okay, when I was a beginner band student, I couldn't hit a high B flat. Now I can hit a high B flat any day. That is a challenge that is solved. I never have to practice that note just for the sake of being able to hit the note again, right?
Mm.
And so for other things like being able to multiple tongue, being able to have flexibility or practicing certain excerpts or things or whatever, it's like if I just missed a note in a piece, that was a challenge. And so I would go back one note before and practice getting to that note and fixing it. And once it was fixed, as long as I could play it like 3 or 10 times in a row, I would consider that completely done. That's one of the 100,000 things I needed to fix, but it was much more motivating to think of it as just slowly chipping away at a finite list as opposed to this infinite percentage small increase kind of mindset that I think a lot of us are taught to have. And so sometimes I would go into a practice room and think to myself, I am going to go in here and I'm not coming out until this one small issue or one lick or whatever is solved. And so sometimes that would take me 30 minutes and I'd be done. Sometimes that would take me 3, 5 hours. And then, once it was done though, the next day I could do it. And so I think that's a big that's probably a big reason why students might go into the practice room so much and not come out with much progress, is because they're practicing too many things at the same time and they need to be more focused and more specific with what they are actually trying to improve. Even if it's just 2 notes, if you fix 2 notes in your practice session, those are 2 notes you never have to work on again. And I think thinking of it that way to me is much more manageable, and
Mm.
it produced much more fruitful practice.
Oh, that is so, 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 so good. I have one last practicing question for you, and it's something that I read on your website, and you wrote that when you practice, you use the acknowledge, validate the negative thought, counter with realistic optimism, move on method. And when I saw that, I thought, yes, oh, I can not agree with this more. Can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, of course. So I used to be the kind of practicer who, the mindless practicer who would get so angry at myself in a practice room that I think at one point I threw a stand. It was my stand, so to be fair, but yeah, and I developed so much tension in my body and just negative thoughts that I just had a shift. I think around my sophomore year or junior year, where I was like, I need to be more deliberate with how I process my emotions and how I manage them, because this is not working for me, because it was physically painful, like with how tense I was. And so I don't remember exactly where I heard of this method specifically. I think it was some master class that I had at Baylor. But I started paying attention and prioritizing, actually taking the time to address all of the negative thoughts I had. And it really started to, at first I thought it was kind of like this sort of woo woo, like sort of fluff thing that I didn't need. I don't need to do that. And once I started taking it seriously and I started practicing it, it really revealed just the true depth of how much I beat myself up in the practice room. And the kinds of things I would say to myself were things that I would never say out loud to any other human in a million years because they were so negative. And I think a lot of musicians fall into that category. And I think that might have been one of the best things I did for myself is just to learn to be kinder to myself and to just accept, um, yes, that failure is part of the process, but that I also just that I was a that I don't know. I guess that I was not ever going to be perfect. I think that was part of being kinder to myself, and that it was okay to have bad days. It was okay to have bad moments mentally, but I needed to be better overall and to just be kinder to myself and to use this method to just sort of replace these thoughts and build habits of more positive thinking. A really good example of how this really helped me was at the Met audition because I was very deliberate about doing this during my practice. And one of the thoughts I had was I'm probably going to see some very famous people at this audition because it's the kind of audition that would attract very, high level players. And that could make me nervous. It probably would make me nervous. And so my counter to that was those people may be good players, but they can have bad days and you might have a good day. They might have sounds that the audition committee does not want. They might just not be as good at an excerpt as you are because there's no reason, like they are humans. They are just humans, just like you are. They are not supernatural. And so if you can put in the kind of work, actually, the way I put it, I had a reminder in my phone that popped up every morning for years that was if you practice like a professional, you will start to sound like one. And so I reasoned that if I just put in the right kind of work and I was serious about it, I was mentally like engaged in all of my practice, that that level of effort would show up in my playing, and it did. And that includes the mental aspect as well, because that was one of the most nerve wracking auditions of my life, and I was actually shaking, but I learned to manage it well enough to have it not show up in my playing. Um, and uh, I'm trying to remember the author of the Five Rings. It's like a this Japanese samurai who like has like I think the all-time record for most number of battles and people killed and like single-handedly, and like he survived all of them and stuff. Like there's like movies about this guy. I think Mizaki, I don't know. Don't quote me on that. But anyway, he talks about like how did he train? How does he get that good? And he's like you have to train like every single training session should be you should act as if it is as life or death as an actual battle. And I think applying that to music, not necessarily the life or death part, but just that you should practice with the amount of seriousness that you perform at, if you want to be able to perform at that level. And truthfully, I just was very lackadaisical and non-effortful in my practice for a very long time. And until I changed that, my playing also did not reflect any kind of um, really polished qualities or advanced musicality or things like that. And frankly, that's the problem a lot of students have almost universally. Like that's a issue I run into even for the students who are good. I think there's always a level of professionality that I feel like they can go down a little bit farther, and that is not the same thing as perfectionism. It's sort of a dedication to the craft in a way that is scary. It's saying there's another book I really liked, which is I'm Here to Win by Chris McCormick, and it's saying when you're preparing an audition, I'm here to win, not I'm here to do my best, because hidden in that statement is the idea that your best might not be good enough. Whereas if you set your goal as I am going to win, it will be crushing if you don't. But to set that as your goal, you have to prepare in every way you possibly can to achieve that success. And I think that's just there's just a depth to that I think most people have not fully seen. And I wouldn't say even I have fully realized that depth, but it's something that I guess meditate on and think about like um a lot in my own practice and my own ambitions even now. So
Mhm. This is so great. I mean, this is, I think, an episode people are going to have to listen to several times. You have such great wisdom in there. I'm going to do a 180 on the
okay.
topic here. And so, Sasha, you're a vocal advocate of the transgender community. And you have such great information on your website. I hope that all of the listeners go on your website. You share great resources and you help provide so much information and answer so many questions about gender identity and gender expression. And one of the things that you talk about in is allyship. And I think that is so important. Can you speak to that a little bit? What is it like? What would you like people to know about being an ally um, right now in the classical music community, but also in the world at large?
Yeah, that is a great question that again I could talk about for hours. I think one of the biggest things that I see over and over and over again, as I have come out and started moving through the world, as a transgender woman, is that there are lots of well-meaning people who inadvertently, one of the biggest mistakes they make in their allyship is actually it's not the misgendering, it's not the getting the name wrong, it's not saying something that's a little bit awkward. It's never the language because frankly, I think most trans people care way more about whether or not we have rights
Hmm.
than whether or not you're using the correct language for us. It's mostly an issue of like, are you trying? Right? And are you willing to correct yourself and respect like my identity? Because that's like it is in some ways the bare minimum, but that is sometimes a lot to ask of some people. But that's again, that's not the main issue. The main thing that I have personally experienced is actually ostracization through a fear of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or being offensive, um,
Mm,
through ignorance, and also just a lack of willingness and also just of knowledge of how to combat that ignorance. Um,
yeah.
and like I've heard more than one trans person say this statement, but we weren't born with the knowledge of like the correct language or the correct way to sort of interact with other trans people. That is those are things that we had to learn. And we I learned them through being in the trans community, through like just finding online spaces primarily, but also through as I approached the date where I realized that I was trans, which was in 2020, late 2020, I was looking around on my friend group and realized I had acquired quite a few LGBTQ plus friends. And I think some of it is just being the kind of person who a trans person would want to talk to. And so that's why I say ostracization is actually one of the worst things that I think people do, even though I think they're doing it in a sort of well-meaning place most of the time. Um, and like the ones who want to be allies, in other words, right? Because if you don't allow yourself to make those mistakes and be an imperfect human around a person, and if you don't have the humility to acknowledge that you probably will make mistakes and that that's just something you will have to deal with, emotionally, basically, because it is embarrassing and painful. I've made mistakes myself with some of my friends. But if you're not willing to put in that effort just to be able to include trans people in the group, in the conversation, in whatever social situation you're in, then you're not going to learn these things. You're not going to get the correction. You're not going to just learn who trans people are as people, as opposed to a a demographic.
Hmm.
Um, because even for me, I had never met a single trans woman before I realized I was one. And then as soon as I did, I started meeting lots of them. And I don't, some of that is sort of intentional, but I became the kind of person that a trans woman would talk to. And I was, like I said, I had lots of queer friends before that anyway. So I was definitely like an ally. But there's a whole joke about that. Oh yeah, I'm not trans. I'm just an ally, just a real good ally. That's all. Yeah. But yeah. So I mean, I would say that's the biggest thing. But other than that, I think standard advocacy things also apply. Because like I said, our rights are under attack in many, many, many places. If you're listening in the UK, um, I will try to avoid talking about politics too directly, but please, call your senators, call your, prime ministers or whatever, send in letters. Don't support people who are vocally extremely vocally anti-trans, because one, they tend to also align with groups like neo-Nazis. It's a funny coincidence there, but just a trend I have observed. And yeah, just be aware of like the politics going on in your own city, in your state, in your whatever, and just be active. Be active enough to sign a petition, to go to a rally if you see one nearby, to at the very least vote. Um, and I think that's, I don't know. I think a lot of people are already doing that, but I would say now it is especially necessary because right now I think for the anti-trans movement is very big because we are the new boogeyman of people who need a boogeyman for their politics, and it will eventually change. I think it'll be the exact same at some point, like the gay rights movement, where it's just sort of treated as normal, as a fight that has been finished. It's not exactly, but it's. I think we will get there, and there will be a new like boogeyman to defend. But right now, I think it's largely trans people. So if you are not aware of any of the backlash to the trans rights movement, you should try to find some news about it and try to find some advocacy groups and just get on some mailing lists and just throw your voice in to be heard, because what we need is numbers and voices to be heard in support of us.
Yeah. And I'm going to recommend that the listeners really go to your website because, as I said, you did such a great job providing information for people to understand gender identity a little bit better and how, any questions that they might have, I feel is answered on your websites. It's such a great resource. So thank you for putting it there. And I feel that it's so important for anyone who's out there to see you as an example that maybe they might identify with you and never had someone that they identified with before. So I feel like it's so wonderful that you are really leading by example and living your truth.
Thank you. And I have to actually give a lot of credit to the website to my friend Elizabeth Harriman. She's playing on the Les Mis Broadway tour right now. So hi Elizabeth, if you are listening to this. She's amazing at what she does. And she helped me to put all those resources together and package them so nicely. So thank you. I'm glad it's
Yeah.
helpful for people. And yeah, I'm glad to be able to be that source of information and inspiration for people. Um, so yeah, follow me on Instagram and stuff. I
Sasha, I know that you have to leave now, right? Do you want me to wrap
have to
things up?
leave soon. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I could just wrap it up
Okay.
right now. Oh, I could go for 2 more hours with you
I
though.
know,
I feel
Sam.
like there's so much I would love to cover and cover that topic a little bit longer as well. But I will let you go. So let me see. What can I say? Um, oh, I'm gonna take my notes out. Sasha, there's one video in particular on your Instagram that I love, and I'm going to share that link in the show notes with all of the other links. And it's you performing a piece you wrote called Identity. And I would like to conclude our conversation by citing your words because I think it's a message that is so important for all of us to hear or be reminded of as musicians, but also as human beings trying to fulfill our destinies out there in the world. And you say in that this section of the piece you share on the video is a representation of the exuberance of finally letting go of all of the masks that hide us from ourselves and living according to one's own joys and principles and desires rather than chasing after the acceptance of someone else's ill conceived idea of us. I just love these words. I wish that for all of us. I think you're such an incredible role model for anyone trying to live their life more authentically. And I thank you for sharing your message with us today. I wish we had 3 more hours. Maybe you can come back at some point.
I would love to come back. And those words sound so great coming out of your mouth. So thank you for sharing them.
Sasha, I'm going to put the links for listeners to reach you on Instagram, on YouTube, on your amazing website. So thank you so much again.
Of course. Happy to be here.